Tutorial: How to make kombucha. While it's always nice to pick up a kombucha drink from the store, the main method people use to produce kombucha is brewing it for yourself. In this part of the guide, we're going to look at how to brew your own kombucha at home. Ingredients for making kombucha. The materials and ingredients made to make kombucha are simple. You need glass jars to make it in, tea, either bags or loose leaf, sugar, and kombucha culture or SCOBY. The choice brand of tea is up to you, and the type of sugar is also unimportant, as long as it gets an adequate amount. Sugar is vital for the fermentation process, and for those wanting a low sugar drink, it's just a matter of fermenting it for sufficient time to bring the sugar level down very low. How to brew. Get a glass jar of up to 1 liter in volume and 3/4 filled with boiling water and add 2 black tea bags, 2 to 3 bags per 800 to 1000 milliliters. Leave to draw brew for at least 15 minutes, then add 60 to 70 grams of plain white sugar, approximately a 1/4 cup max for a full liter, less sugar if less than a liter, and stir to dissolve, 80 to 90 grams max for 1 liter. You can use raw or cane sugar if you want, though it makes little difference. Remove the tea bags and leave to cool to room temperature. It will take a few hours to cool. Note: always use a glass jar or container to brew your kombucha, as it becomes more acidic as it brews and can react with plastic or metal containers. Once the brew of sweetened tea has cooled to room temperature, pour at least 3 tablespoons of the supplied kombucha tea or starter, also at room temp, into the tea. Then carefully add your supplied kombucha SCOBY culture into the jar as well. It may float or sink, and it doesn't really matter which it does. Place the jar in your pantry or somewhere out of direct sunlight to avoid temperature extremes, and cover the top with muslin or some other breathable fabric to stop ants and fruit flies getting into it, but still allowing air to flow in and out of the jar. Air is needed by the yeast and bacteria in the SCOBY to breathe. Leave it for at least 4 to 5 days to ferment and brew. During this time, a new SCOBY or baby will form on the surface of the tea, and if your original one was floating, the new baby will most likely be added to it. After 4 to 5 days, check it to see if it is starting to build up bubbles underneath the surface SCOBY. If it is, try and carefully draw a little bit out with an eyedropper or pipette by carefully tinkling the jar on the edge to taste it. If it's still really sweet and not very bubbly, leave it another day, then test again. If it's really fizzy and only slightly sweet, it's ready. If it tastes vinegary, it's been left too long. Ultimately, you bullet it off when it reaches the level of flavor that you personally like. When tested, try not to submerge or get the top of the SCOBY wet, as it stalls the fermenting process because the wet layer slows oxygen transfer to the bacteria and yeast. What's next? When it's ready, pour off 80 to 90% of it to either drink straight away, or you can bottle it to drink over the next few days, etc. Take the remaining 10% and the now 2 SCOBYs and start a new batch with another brew of sweetened tea as per the start of this instruction. Using 2 SCOBYs in the second batch should give you an even better result than the first. It may take 2 or 3 brews to get it really working well. A SCOBY of 3 or 4 layers generations gives a good, consistent brew. Be patient. After the 3rd or 4th brew, you can peel off the older SCOBYs and use them to start a new second brew in a new jar. You may soon learn that you may want 3 or 4 bottles brewing at once, or use a larger glass jar if you can find one to make enough for everyone in the household to have a glass each day. Experiment yourself using different flavor teas or herbal fruit infusion teas, but always use at least 1 or 2 black or green tea bag, as many of the herbal fruit teas contains very little actual tea leaves, and the tea is necessary for the SCOBY to feed on. The SCOBY. As for the SCOBY, I have found that the SCOBY that is 3 or 4 layers, generations, thick gives the best flavor drinks, so don't be surprised or disappointed if your first batch is nothing to rave about. Simply put both the original mother SCOBY and the newly grown SCOBY or baby into a new batch of tea for the second week and you should get a better brew next time round. 2 or 3 scobies in a brew seems to give a better result than just a single scobie. In colder weather, the scobies may not grow as fast or become as thick as in summer, but they will still give a good brew, and as long as the kombucha still brews and tastes good, then the size of the scobies matters little. Stuck together layers of Kobe float better than single ones too, because of the air trap between the layers, so I like to keep my scobies at 2 to 4 layers thick and floating on their surface. If your SCOBY sinks in a new batch of tea, it just means the new one that forms on the surface won't be stuck to it, obviously. If your SCOBYs always float and get thicker each week, peel off the older bottom layer or 2 so that it doesn't take up too much volume in the jar. If they don't float, simply throw out the ones that go dark brown with age and only use the newest 2 or 3 generations. What to do with the old SCOBYs? Give them to friends to start their own kombucha, start another jar batch yourself, or simply throw them out. Remember, it's all about experimenting, finding what works best for you in your situation and what kind of flavor you like.